I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my True Crime Report. My guest today, Nicole Egan, is an award-winning journalist whose career has spanned nearly 3 decades. Egan first broke the story of Andrea Constand's drugging and rape at the hands of Bill Cosby in 2005, and she stayed on the story, attending both of his trials. She is the executive producer of the excellent podcast Chasing Cosby and the author of the book by the same name. Welcome, Nicole Egan.
Thank you.
You wrote about Cosby in 2005 and you continued writing about it for a decade and a half. What made you stay on the story?
I think the main thing that made me stay on the story is the way that I saw the media back off the story, the rest of the media back off the story in 2005. I saw how much Cosby was able to control the media and get them not to write certain stories or report certain things. And in fact, used the media to put out negative information on these women. In many cases, some of this information wasn't even true, like in Andrea Constand's case. So that was one of the main things that kept me on, because I just couldn't trust the other media to report what was going on and give these victims a voice. I mean, I didn't want to believe it either when this first broke. I was a Cosby fan. I grew up watching Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids and the Cosby Show, and my reaction was not the cause. But I had to put my personal feelings aside and find out who this person was that was accusing him and what her background was and what the allegations were. And I quickly found through my own reporting how credible she was, and that she had taped phone calls that supported what she was saying. And instead, Cosby's people leaked to the media that these phone calls, it was very interesting because Celebrity Justice was reporting that these phone calls were Andrea's mother shaking down Cosby for money, trying to shake down Cosby for money, and that they happened before she went to police, none of which was true. And I reported, my own exclusive stories that they happened after she went to police, and that she did not take them up on this offer. And those stories didn't get picked up, but the other ones did. And so I just really saw how he was able to control the media. And I found out later, too, Bruce Castor, at the time, the DA, kept saying these phone calls were illegal wiretaps. And I found out really only in the last year and a half that he knew back then that they weren't, because he had his first assistant, Risa Furman, research the issue. And she came to him and told him these are legal. And yet even the press release he put out saying he wasn't going to charge Cosby, he said that these were illegal wiretaps. And I only found out because Risa was deposed in Andrea's defamation lawsuit against Castor, and she says that in her deposition. It's in a court document. And I didn't find that out till end of 2018 when I was finishing up writing the book. So that was a big reason. I had seen the way Cosby could control the media. And it was really shocking and disillusioning to me and I was attacked by the media as well. It just seemed like this protective veil just hovered over him. That was just whatever he did was not going to be reported by anyone else. And I didn't trust it to be reported by anyone else if it ever happened in the future. So it was when I left the Daily News and was with People, after Andrea settled her lawsuit in 2006, I packed up my files in a waterproof box and put them in the basement. I just could not get rid of them because I thought this could come back someday. I didn't think it would be Andrea's case, but I thought, there's already 14 women accusing him now in 2005, 2006. Someone else could come forward in the future. And I really didn't trust the media to report it or to report it in a way that was accurate. Even the Associated Press, when it was writing the stories in 2005, they were always from Cosby's point of view. I would write a very, middle of the road. Bill Cosby is accused of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman at his Cheltenham Township police, at his mansion, police say. And the AP story would be, Bill Cosby's attorney says allegations that he drugged and sexually assaulted a woman are bizarre and preposterous. And they didn't report on the second accuser till a day or two later to Mara Green, and instead they led with, that there was a bar complaint filed against her. I mean, it was victim blaming, victim shaming of the worst kind, and the media is one of the worst perpetrators of this. There is not a real understanding of sexual assault victims and sexual assault victim behavior. I was actually horrified when I watched a Dateline that was done with 29 of the women. I didn't watch it till within the last year. And it came out in the fall of 2015 before he was arrested. I think that's when it did. Yes, the fall of 2015. I mean, it was just and some of these women have arrest records, and it was victim blaming, victim shaming to the nth degree, and nobody blinked. Because I did learn the women were upset about it afterward, but hey, they won an Emmy for that. So, Watch it with today's eyes, especially since the Me Too movement. I watched it and I was like, oh my God, you know?
Wow. I just did a case where the Dateline covered, and their coverage of it was just the defense's side, just entirely from the defense, nothing from the prosecution, and really skewed the facts of the case. So, oh, maybe that was a 2020. Hold on. I'm not surprised. It's so often the media reporting is so poor.
I don't think people realize the power celebrities have with the media. You know, part of it is also because they have endless financial resources. And news organizations are very scared of being sued. So all they have to do is get a high-powered attorney like Marty Singer, which is who Cosby had in 2005, to threaten to sue news organizations, and they will back off. Or, you know, if it's a celebrity, they want access to him in the future. Or they often have the same representatives who represent other celebrities, and they don't want to lose access to those celebrities. So they have a lot of power to dictate coverage and control coverage. And people don't realize, like, celebrities even dictate what questions a reporter is allowed to ask them before they even sit down for an interview. These interviews are usually, if they're lucky, 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. And the questions have been approved beforehand. And they don't dare violate that because they might never sit down with this particular celebrity again, or any of the clients of this particular celebrity's agency. And Bill Cosby was represented by William Morris Endeavor, and they are the biggest agency that represents writers, celebrities, everybody. So, you know, there's just a lot of layers to this that really made, and believe me, it wasn't fun. It was not, you know, a story I enjoyed covering. I got attacked on every front. It's not one I was showered with awards and never won an award. It was never been anything about that. It's just more that this was the truth. I believe this to be the truth, and I just wanted to make sure the coverage stayed honest.
Yeah, I really understand your frustration because I feel it a bit when I cover true crime. There's high-powered PR people for these convicted murderers. You know, it's really a battle, and even Bill Cosby kind of hints at it when he's being questioned about it, and he says to the journalist, if you want to be considered a serious journalist, you won't even ask the question.
Right.
Or if you want to have integrity. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean if you want these big interviews, you won't even ask the question?
Right. Right. And he talks, and then he goes on and says, you know, he's going to have his agent call so-and-so, like he knew the name of the person to call in LA. Because, of course, you know, it was the entertainment world that was covering him. So, yeah, it was astonishing to me. And, you know, like I said, the difference between 2005 and 2014 is there was no social media in 2005, and Bill Cosby could control the media. He couldn't control social media. And that was the big difference in 2014. Cosby at the time was in the middle of those town halls where he was going across the country, going to inner cities and basically lecturing Black people about how to behave. And one critic called it the Blame Before tour. So the media couldn't get into these, couldn't get access to these unless they were invited in. And that was another thing he was doing, was dangling that carrot. You know, if you don't cover this, you'll get in there. And I know this because when I first started covering it, his spokesman said to me, oh, we got to get you into one of these town halls. And that offer quickly went away. ABC didn't cover this case at all in 2005, except for one. And they interviewed Tamara Green, who everyone else interviewed, except for one story. It was pro Cosby, where it basically said a source says that what Cosby says happened between him and this woman was consensual. And that was basically the only difference between what she had to say happened and what he had to say happened. And then lo and behold, ABC gets an exclusive first sit down with him after one of his town halls in that May.
I just interviewed Mark Ebner, and he felt that ABC really protected Bill Cosby. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I think they all did, yes. ABC became, yes, in 2005. And if you watch Tamara Green's interview with Matt Lauer, we have an excerpt from that on the podcast, their coverage of him, Matt Lauer was very aggressive with Tamara Green. You know, there was a lot of protecting of Bill Cosby going on throughout the national media and print and TV.
Mark Ebner also called Marty Singer the lawyer you call when you're guilty. You received a lot of communications from Marty Singer. Can you talk about the content of that communication?
Yeah, it wasn't fun. It was probably the worst experience of my career, even to this day, and stress-inducing and anxiety-inducing, because he was calling daily. He was sending threatening letters to my newspaper, threatening to sue. He was calling and yelling at me on a regular basis. I was going on a lot of these, like Greta Van Susteren show when she had it, and Dan Abrams. Even though I was getting beaten up on those shows, it was a platform when I was going on there, and they weren't happy about that. So he'd yell at me about that and threatened to sue. And it wasn't until many years later that I saw an interview he did, like in 2009 or 2010 with the New York Times, where he said his strategy is to kill stories before they ever run, because they don't like to sue, because you don't win very much money, and they're very hard to win, these defamation cases. So his whole strategy is to kill a story and make sure it never runs. And he's always like, I wish I knew that in 2005. But it didn't cause me to back down. And my paper was amazing. Like, to this day, I say that there is no news organization in the country that would have let me pursue the story in 2005 the way the Daily News did. And I know this for a fact now because there are still media agencies, reluctant who are scared of him and his power and his wealth.
I got very angry reading your book, reading about David Carr and Mark Whitaker, and even Ronan Farrow's mea culpas about Bill Cosby, that they should have asked tough questions then. And you even write in the book that maybe it was damage control. Why do you think they did that?
It was heartening to me in a way, because I thought, wow, at least they're doing it now. The other reaction I had was, where were all of you 9 years ago? The media had not backed off this story in 2005. It might have forced the DA at the time, put pressure on him to keep investigating this case, because even though there were 14 women total accusing Bill Cosby, back then the DA didn't bother to interview most of them. And the pressure of the media coverage would have, I think, kept it on him to at least keep the investigation open longer than he did. He closed it without even telling his detectives. They had just come up with a list of leads to follow up on in a meeting that day, and found out through the news that night that Castor had closed the investigation. And I thought, if the media had kept the pressure on back in 2005, then maybe even more women would have come forward, and maybe their cases would not have been outside the statute of limitations back then. Because that's the travesty of all of this. The media coverage does tend to make more women or victims comfortable with coming forward. And, a lot of the women who came forward in 2014, 2015, most of them had never heard of the case in 2005. But their cases might have still been within the statute of limitations had they heard about it back then. So that's what's so sad about this. By the time this case took off, Andrea Constand's case was the only one that was still within the statute of limitations. Ronan Farrow's was particularly interesting to me, and he makes light of it when he talks about these interviews. But maybe that's what made him stay on Harvey Weinstein, despite all that he went through on that. But still, people don't realize how hard it is to write these stories like this about a celebrity like Bill Cosby, because he still has 1 million fans on Twitter. Most people had never heard of Jeffrey Epstein or Harvey Weinstein before these scandals broke, so they don't find it very difficult to believe they did what they're accused of doing. But people had a relationship with Bill Cosby. They thought they knew who he was. And there's still a lot of people clinging to that image of him. I mean, like I said, he has 1 million followers on Twitter. So, it's, I don't denigrate what Ronan did with the Harvey Weinstein story is amazing. He came under an enormous amount of pressure to kill that story. But it's still different to take on a Bill Cosby. Ever since the podcast came out, too, I've got this one guy who's been very threatening me, who's been sending me these awful emails and threatening, to get his lawyers after me and doing things to me on Twitter like that. And, the survivors talked about it at our bonus episode, our event in February, that many of them have had death threats. You pay a high price for coming forward against a man like Bill Cosby, and no one pays that price more than the survivors do. Death threats, some of them have lost marriages. They've struggled daily, some of them, with the after effects of just being drugged and raped by him, let alone the backlash against them for daring to say that someone like Bill Cosby did it. Because we are a celebrity worshiping culture in this country. We truly think that these people are who they say they are, and they're not. And I was as guilty of that as anyone. I mean, I grew up watching Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids on Saturday mornings with my brother. I loved the Cosby Show. It was very special to me. So I truly thought he was Cliff Huxtable because the show was based on his life. I mean, looking back, I was very naive, but I did. I had to put my personal feelings aside and cover this story when I was assigned to it when it first broke. And a lot of people just aren't able to separate their emotions from the facts. And they just base their opinions on this case on emotion, not facts. And what I keep saying is that what I hope, the book and the podcast do is it encourages people to seek out more facts. That all the criminal court documents from the trial, everything from both trials is online for free. But I think mostly when people see what I see and hear from the survivors like I have and hear them tell their stories, which is what I've heard for all these years, I mean, I think that has a lot of power. And I think that's why the podcast, too, has been so popular because, you know, you can hear the emotion in the survivors' voices when they talk.
You dedicate the book to the victims, and your book paints a very warm portrait of Andrea Constant. Can you talk a little bit about her character and her background and how she came to come to the police with her true story of sexual assault and drugging?
Sure. So this broke on the news in Philly on Thursday, January 20th, 2005. And her name was not being released at the time, which is the norm for sexual assault. Survivors were not. You know, the media does not report the names or release the photos of sexual assault victims without their consent. But that would quickly change with this story, which is another thing that was outrageous about it. So when I got assigned to it, you know, obviously I was a fan of Cosby, and my reaction was not the cause, because that's what we called him in Philly. And I just put my personal feelings aside. I was like, okay, well, who is this woman? And was she even in a position to know him? And how did she know him? And it said she was a former Temple University employee. And, you know, Cosby was its most famous alum, and he was on the board of trustees. And that I found out she was director of operations for the women's basketball team there. So I called a source at Temple, and they told me her name, although we didn't use it until we had her permission, again, which is the norm in these cases. And I quickly found out, like they said, she was very well liked, very well thought of, was a stellar employee. They were all kind of blown away by this, saying, you know, we just know you don't say anything about Bill Cosby and Temple without thinking about it real carefully. Because, of course, Andrea was still employed by Temple University when this happened to her. So after it happened, she was just having nightmares, and for a year. She was nightmares. She had gone home. She was switching careers. She was going to go be a massage therapist like her father. She was from Canada, so she was going to quit her job at Temple and go back to Canada to go to massage therapy school. And she was worried about how to tell her boss, and Cosby had become this mentor to her over the past 15 months. So he invited her to his home that night and to talk about it, and she'd been there alone and with others a few times over the years. So there was nothing unusual about that invitation. But he told her she was nervous. He gave her what he said was herbal medication, because they had talked many times about homeopathic remedies, which is what she believed. She didn't take prescription medication. She really didn't even take over-the-counter medication. So that's what she thought it was. But the research I did on her at the time, I was able to look up clips on her because I had her name, and she was one of the top high school basketball players in Canada. She was recruited by 50 to 60 universities in the U.S., ultimately choosing the University of Arizona. She then went to play in Italy after college, and she dreamed of playing for the WNBA. And actually paid herself to go to several cities to try out. And when she didn't make the teams, she decided it wasn't going to happen for her. And that's when Don Staley from Temple came calling and asked her to take on the job of director of operations there. And everything I learned from her, from former teammates, from a close friend, was just, she was just as honest as the day is long. Like, she's just a very, and I've only gotten to know her in the last year or so, really, since this podcast project we've been doing, because I always went through her attorney. And she's just, you know, everything I ever thought she was. She's very spiritual. She's very much into meditation and, you know, still. And I think that's what helped her stay strong throughout this whole process. But no, I didn't even meet her and have a moment like where we sort of looked at each other till closing arguments for the prosecution for the second trial. I was sitting 2 rows behind her, and she kind of looked to me and said, "Nikki?" And I said, "Yeah." I mean, I didn't, you know, I kept my journalistic distance. Like I said, I went through her attorneys, which is what you're supposed to do. But she's an incredible person. And she's, you know, the exact opposite. Whatever Bill Cosby's people have said about her that you read in the media, she's actually the exact opposite of that. And that's the travesty of what happens in these cases, is that people, no matter, even if you are an Andrea Constant, where you have never done anything wrong in your life, and honestly, it shouldn't be used against you anyway. Prostitutes can be raped, as sexual assault experts say. Still, that's what's done. So they can't put this information in a court of law because of rape shield laws, so they would get to the media, and then the media runs with it. So that's the real travesty of a lot of this, too, is what it does to a woman's reputation when they come forward against a person like Bill Cosby. They set out to destroy you. That is what they do. They set out to destroy you, whether you're a reporter covering the story or, you know, whatever. I got laid off from people right after the Cosby case went to the jury for the first trial. You know, I'm not saying it was connected. There were 299 other people laid off that day, but it was really odd. I mean, I'd been top of my game. They weren't crazy about how much coverage I was doing with the Cosby story, but I was not going to give up on it. It was my story. And, I didn't want the survivors to be forgotten.
And her lawyer, Andrea Constant's lawyer, Dolores Triani, she didn't want you to write that Andrea Constant was a lesbian. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I was working on in 2005, as I was covering the developments in the case, I was also working on a profile of Andrea. And that's where I said I got all the information about the type of person she was. But as I was interviewing one of her teammates, her former teammates, they said, she's gay, don't you? And I said, no, I didn't. And I was thinking, well, Cosby had leaked, or someone had leaked to ABC that Cosby said what happened, because he did talk to police in 2005, that what happened between them was consensual. So I went to Andrea's lawyer and I said, Dolores, well, is this okay to print this? Like, what, do you want this out in the public? And she said, no. I said, but Cosby's out there saying that what happened between them was consensual. Wouldn't this show that that's not true? And she said, no, because they'll just find some guy she dated in high school or college to say she's not really gay. And that's exactly what happened when it did come out, many years later. That's exactly what happened. And then Cosby, in his own deposition, is asked about that. And he goes, well, because Andrea was in a relationship with a woman at the time all of this was going on, back in 2000. The whole time she was friends with him. Again, I was naive. I didn't think they would sink that low, but they did. They pulled a lot of really underhanded stunts throughout the course of this case.
Another person who I didn't have such a high view of him after reading this book was Bruce Castor, the DA, who announced in February 2005 that he wouldn't pursue the Cosby case. You even suggested that he could be seen as being part of Bill Cosby's defense. How so?
Well, what happened is, and I'd also reported in 2005 that Bruce's father had been the lawyer that represented the seller when Cosby bought the mansion where this happened. And he didn't disclose that Castor disclosed that relationship to Cosby's defense lawyer, but did not disclose it to Andrea's lawyers, which you're supposed to do. It's not like you can make a bar complaint about it or anything, but it's you are required to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, that if you had any prior relationship with the person whose case you're handling. So, what happened is when the case exploded again in 2014 and 2015, Castor all of a sudden decided to run for his old job back. And when he lost it, he started saying that the press release, and I'm laughing because it's so comical, it's so ludicrous, the press release that he put out in 2005 saying Bill Cosby was not going to be charged with sexually assaulting Andrea was also an immunity agreement that Cosby would never be prosecuted for this charge. And that's why Cosby was so open during the civil suit depositions, because he knew he'd been told he would never be prosecuted for this case. And so he ended up testifying for 7 hours after Bill Cosby was arrested in front of a judge and trying to explain all the ways that this, the charges should be withdrawn against Cosby because he had promised him back in 2005 that he'd never be charged and that he even had this signed immunity agreement. And the judge was very puzzled. He's like, Bruce, you know that immunity agreements have to be signed off on by a judge. Well, yes. And he said, but if you want to hide it, you just give it a case number and throw it in a drawer somewhere. But a judge has to sign off on it. And then Castor just started going off and calling himself the sovereign and all this. And the judge finally gave up. But that is the proper procedure. And as this other podcast I've been being interviewed on, this former prosecutor says, you also have to give someone something in exchange for it. Like, you don't just give immunity to a criminal. The criminal has to agree to help you in another case or something. There's got to be, you don't just say, we'll never charge you for this just because we like you. So that's another part of it I hadn't really thought about. So then when first jury, there was a mistrial. And as we're heading into the second trial, Castor all of a sudden files a defamation lawsuit against Andrea and her attorneys. They had filed one against him when he was running for DA because of these disparaging remarks he made about her in a public Facebook post and on Twitter. And so they filed a defamation lawsuit against him. So then he filed one 2 years later against her. And in it was basically, a roadmap about how to cross-examine Andrea Constant, because it had all the statements she'd given to police, where they differed, blah, blah, blah. Wow. So this writer from Jezebel, Diana Moscovitz, actually wrote a story with the headline, because I'd been laid off by then, but said, Bruce Castor officially becomes a member of the Bill Cosby defense team. And it just cracked me up, because that's really what it was. It was just a roadmap. And also the timing. It was right before a few months before the second trial. It was going to be a local jury this time instead of being one from Pittsburgh and Allegheny County across the state. So, it was an effort to, take the jury pool and plant this seed there for whatever potential jurors might have this case.
What's so shocking about your podcast is you play the tapes of Bill Cosby and his conversation with Andrea Constand's mother. They're just so... his reaction is so strange. He says to her at one point, Mom, she even had an orgasm. I'm not sure if that's on the tape or if that's just a reporting of the conversation she had, but Andrea Constant's mother is asking for the name of the medication, and he says that he'll send it, and he never does, and he's sort of, I don't know, kind of bullying her, I guess, was my thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, what happened is when Andrea, so on the morning of January 13th, 2005, Andrea woke up from yet another nightmare, screaming. Her parents could hear her during that year screaming in her sleep, and she was sobbing when she woke up again that morning. And she called her mom, who was on her way to work. Mom, I think I have PTSD. Bill Cosby drugged and raped me. And her mom's about, pulls over because she's, about ready to wreck because she didn't see this one coming. But anyway, when she gets home from work, she tells Andrea, she said, I want his phone number. Because she had noticed Andrea wasn't herself when she came home. And she was worried about her. She knew her personality had changed. She'd really withdrawn into herself. She wasn't spending time with her nieces like she usually did, or her sister. And she wanted to know what drug Cosby had given her daughter. And Andrea was scared. She's like, no, Mom, he has so much power. And she said, Andrea, if you don't give me the number, I'm going to hop on a plane and I'm going to fly there and confront him myself. I want to know what drug he gave you. And so Andrea gives him the number. It was an answering service. That's the only number she had for him. And so Cosby calls her like 3 days later. In the meantime, she'd gone to the police. And actually, before Gianna placed the call, she filed a police report in Canada. And she wants to know what drug Cosby gave her daughter. And she says, why didn't you call 911? How did you know she was going to wake up? Which is another point I don't think people really pick up on here, is that it's very dangerous to give someone a drug without their knowledge or consent. How do you know they're not allergic to it? How do you know it wouldn't interact badly with something else in their system and kill them? How do you know they're going to wake up? And some of these women drove after he drugged them and don't know how they don't even remember the drive home. So how many women drove after being drugged by him and got in a wreck and died? It could have happened, and we'll never know on either one of those cases, because either one would look like a simple overdose, or it would look like, a drunk driving wreck or just a car wreck. So anyway, so they have like a 2.5 hour conversation. Andrew's on it for part of it. That's when Cosby apparently apologized and said, I'm a sick man, to Gianna. And he's calling her mom throughout the conversation, which is so creepy because Cosby not only groomed these women, he groomed their families. And yes, he says something like, when Andrew was on, he's like, well, you had an orgasm. And Andrew was like, no, I didn't. I mean, she had gone to confront him after he did that to her at one point, and he said the same thing to her, and she just got so upset she left. So he says he'll call her. He tells Gianna he's going to call back to check on Andrea. And at that point, Gianna talks to the police who had taken the report, and her son-in-law, who's a detective. And they talk about it and agree that maybe it'd be a good idea if he's going to call back to record this conversation. And in Canada, it's a one-party consent place where they live. So you only need for it to be legal, she needs to be the only one who consents to it being taped. It doesn't have to be the other person on the other end of the line. It's where the call originated. Whatever it was legal. I'm not even going to get into that. So when he calls back, she takes him. And this time when he calls, it's very different because he had told her in the other call that she said, what drug did you give Andrea? So he goes upstairs, he comes back, and he says, I need to go look at the pill bottle because he says it was a prescription. Then he comes back and says, I can't read it because of my glasses. I'll write it down on a piece of paper and send it to you. And so when he calls back, she's asking him, she says, did you write that down on a piece of paper and send it to me? What was the drug? And he goes, no. And he's very evasive. And this is what's interesting. He starts steering her towards, Andrea is going to college. He starts basically talking to her about establishing an educational trust for Andrea, for school, where if she gets like a 3.0, whatever, he will pay for it and all of this, and says that he's going to have his people call them to follow up on it and wants them to come to Miami, both of them, where he's going to be performing so they can talk about it. And they don't agree to anything. Andrea's not on the call, but Gianna doesn't agree to anything. And that's what that whole call is about. And she keeps trying to ask him about the drug, and he keeps steering the conversation back toward his offer of this educational trust. And that's what, after the call, then Peter Whiterlight from William Morris calls her about it. Marty Singer calls her about it, and they're both leaving messages about this educational trust. Peter Whiterlight is calling from William Morris to set up the travel arrangements. And Andrea's attorneys later testified at the hearings that they thought that he wanted her to go across state lines so that he could have her arrested for extortion if she signed anything. Because that's what he had done with Autumn Jackson, who was the daughter of a former mistress of his. When he stopped paying her money for her education, he'd been paying her mom money, even though he denied that she's his daughter. He'd been paying the mom for many years, and he stopped paying once Autumn dropped out of school. So she and some of her boyfriends, or some guys she knew, started, calling Cosby and threatening him, and then they had her arrested for extortion. So that's what Andrea's attorneys always figured. That's why he wanted her to go to Miami, her and her mom to go to Miami, and was setting her up to be charged with extortion. If she had gone to go to talk about this educational trust, that's what they thought was going to happen. But she doesn't take him up on the offer anyway because she wants justice. I mean, she's worried that this is going to happen to someone else. And that's what her nightmares were about, that there was a woman being sexually assaulted in front of her, and it was her fault because she hadn't spoken out. And that's what drove her to finally go to the police, because she wanted to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. And she was really worried about that.
In 2005, she filed a civil suit for invasion of privacy and emotional distress, as well as, I think, battery is also involved in that suit. And Cosby gave a deposition. Do you think he would have been convicted without that deposition?
I don't know. I mean, I actually do, because all of the women who testified had very similar stories to tell about him. He had, as one of the prosecutors called it, his sadistic sexual script, where he would, go to a woman's agent and say he wanted to mentor this young model. And many of these models were in their teens or barely out of their teens. And then he would talk to the model, and then he would talk to their parents. He would groom, he'd gain their trust. And then when he got them in an environment he controlled, he would drug and sexually assault them, and then he would drop them, and in some cases try to destroy them. The woman who worked for his agent at William Morris, Tom Ilias, after he did it to her, she picks up the phone, because Cosby was so powerful with William Morris that he had a special phone line that he used to call his agent. Like, only Bill Cosby could use that phone line.
Wow.
Of course, woman's testimony, and she overhears Cosby saying to Tom Ilias, well, yeah, but she's away from her desk too much. Basically, he's trying to get her fired the day after he drugs and sexually assaults her. And so she starts crying, calls her mom, and mom says, go to HR, and she ends up filing for workers' comp. And what's interesting is when there are depositions taken in this case, there's no record of it. Like, there was normally the stenographer there taking records. Once they heard what she had to say, William Morris decided to settle.
You also talked to an expert that said his drugging before rape was Cosby's criminal signature. What does that mean?
Well, it means that it was the thing he did that was unique to him. I have to look it up in my book a little to make sure I get this right. But it was, I think she just means it's like part of his MO.
That he can get away with it easier.
Yeah.
It's the thing that he has to do, so he sticks at the scene longer. I thought that was so interesting, and it makes it even more risky too, because someone could die. Just what you were saying, someone could get in an accident, someone could die. What did you think about the press around Bill Cosby, where they were kind of saying, well, what if this is just a fetish? He has to be with inebriated women.
Well, I would say, first of all, yeah, there was some theories put out in court papers that he was a somnophiliac, that means you have to having sex with an unconscious person. It's like with just dead person. I would say that is completely ridiculous, because it's one thing if he gives a woman a pill and says, this is a pill, this is going to make you unconscious, and then I'm going to have sex with you. All right. And the woman says, okay, that's consent, right? She knows I'm going to give you a quaalude. It's this is what it will do to you. Then I will have sex with you once you're unconscious. And then it's like, okay, all right. If a woman agrees, I'm not saying that's even right, but still, that's very different than slipping one to a woman in their drink, or just handing a woman a pill and saying, take this. Like with Kelly, and even then, they're not agreeing. They're agreeing to take a pill. They're not agreeing to have sex with you. There's a big difference. Just because you agree to take a pill from someone does not mean you give them consent to rape you.
Yeah, I was very disturbed by it. It just seemed to be making rape analogous to sex. And this was just some kind of, way that only way he could have sex. But really, when you look at Bill Cosby's personality, so much of it is about him being in control, him being the expert, him lecturing everyone else on how to do it. You keep your grades up. When he wasn't a particularly good student, you point out. And he kind of keeps that demeanor to this day, that he still wants to be in control. The question mark for me really is Camille. She puts out a lot of press releases or letters. One of them said that we're I'm paraphrasing, but, unified couple, meaning we're a team. But my understanding is that none of the family has visited him in prison. What's your take on his relationship with his wife, Camille?
I don't have any firsthand knowledge, I'll say, so I don't really know. But the take I get is, we've talked about this on another podcast. She was 19, he was 26 when they first met each other. I have a feeling that he's always been the one in control in that relationship, certainly financially. I mean, he's the moneymaker. She apparently took over the money early on in their marriage after one of his managers lost almost everything they had. But so she controlled it. However, I didn't think about this till later. A lot of his payments first went to his agency and then would go to her. So he had William Morris paying a lot of these women off for him too. And Camille would have had no knowledge of that because she just sees the money that comes to them from William Morris. So that was another way. I don't know if she just, if this is the consent, maybe he's always had this type of consensual relationship with her. And maybe she assumes that all these others are consensual, that these women knew what was going on. I really don't know. I do know she doesn't have a vested interest in divorcing him. Why should she? He's in prison now. But also there might be, some financial reasons for staying together on her end. Half of everything is not the same as what they have now. And who knows what their financial situation is given the enormous legal fees and everything. He's still being sued as well. One of Gloria Allred's clients still has a lawsuit trial coming up. It's been delayed while Cosby's appeals are sorted out. And that was like his other ones where the women won all of their defamations lawsuits against him. That was all paid through his homeowner's insurance. So it didn't cost him a dime. But that lawsuit he would have to pay for whatever if she wins it, and if the judge, and if there's a substantial settlement.
You sat through the first trial and the second trial. What was the difference between the first trial and the second trial, and why did you describe the first sexual assault expert as lackluster?
Part of it wasn't her fault. Part of it was they put her so late in the trial. There was only one other woman allowed to testify at the first trial, while at the second one there were 5 other women who were allowed to testify. But they put her late in the trial, and the way she was questioned in Pennsylvania, you're only allowed to use a sexual assault expert in a general sense. It can't be specific to the case. So you just have the sexual assault expert there to explain victim behavior in general in sexual assault cases, not in this particular case. And she kept slipping up on that. And it was also the way she was questioned. But also she had put on her Facebook page a comment that indicating support for the Cosby survivors that was on her Facebook page that they used against her. So her testimony wasn't very coherent. It wasn't very effective. And Cosby's people did their best to keep it out completely. And Pennsylvania was only recently allowed sexual assault expert testimony in these cases after the Jerry Sandusky case, and in fact became the 50th state in the country to allow it. So they were doing their best to try to get it kicked out. So what the biggest difference in the second trial, it was a different sexual assault expert, and the prosecution put her on first. And that was Kevin Steele, the DA's call. It was unusual. Normally you put police on and you put this on, blah, blah, blah. But they had the luxury of been able to talk to the jurors in the first trial and get a sense of, why they couldn't come to an agreement, and kind of, were able to see the flaws in their case and the flaws in their approach. So they decided to try something completely different and out of the box, which was putting the sexual assault expert on first. And this woman, Dr. Ziv, was fantastic. She was very methodical. She just debunked rape myth after rape myth after rape myth. And so she kind of prepped the jurors for, okay, this might seem unusual to you, this type of behavior, but it's the norm with sexual assault victims. You know, most sexual assault victims do not go to police. Most sexual assault victims, when they do go to police, don't go to them immediately. There's usually delayed reporting. You know, 85% of reported sexual assaults are with an acquaintance. Only 15% are strangers. So she was able to just go through and just sort of explain, citing, 30, 40 years of research, all the ways that sexual assault victim behavior differs from other crimes.
At the second trial, Bill Cosby's lawyer was Tom Mesereau, and you said that his approach or his strategy was very similar to Michael Jackson, how he tried the Michael Jackson trial. How so?
Well, he tried to say that Andrea was just doing this for money, that she was a con artist and she was out for money. And the problem with that I saw anyway, was it wasn't very logical, because if that were the case, Andrea got her money in 2006. As we found out, they petitioned to have the amount revealed. It was $3.38 million. And that's, by the way, not like nuisance going away money. That's I did something money. So if that were the case, if all she wanted was money, she got her money in 2006. Why is she here? For not just one trial, but two. Because it's so much fun to be called a con artist in headlines all over the world. And that was another thing the prosecution did differently this time, is they, let the jury get to know Andrea a little better. I mean, she is a masseuse and she works with cancer patients and people with chronic diseases. She's just a very gentle, kind person. And they asked her why she was there, and she said, for justice. Because that's the thing she had not gotten in 2006. And she was still worried he was going to do this to someone else. And in fact, there was another woman who came forward who said he did this to her in 2008, which is 3 years after Andrea came forward. And that was her biggest fear, that if, there was no criminal case, if he was not convicted, if he was not put in prison, that he would do this to someone else. And so it had nothing to do with money.
Certainly. And Marguerite Jackson was a witness for the defense, and she said that she overheard traveled with Andrea Constant, and Andrea Constant told her that she was going to set up a powerful man for money, and nothing happened between her and Cosby. Where did her story come from? Is she a super fan, or?
I don't know. She works at Temple University, and yeah, they kept calling her their star witness, the Cosby people. And the interesting thing is I was waiting for the smoking gun. All right. So she says in 2004, in February 2004, she and Andrea shared a room on a trip with the women's basketball team. And Andrea told her she was going to set up someone for money. So the problem was there were no travel records supporting her claim. And Andrea testified that she never shared a room when she traveled. And so the only records that were able to be found were found by the prosecution, and they were from her travel, from this woman Marguerite's travel from February 2003, not from when she said this happened. And in fact, when I talked to the jury, one of the jurors and the jury foreperson, that was one of the things they had a mild disagreement about during deliberate, not disagreement, but whether or not they believed her, because they went through methodically and were like, they were deciding who was credible and who wasn't. And there was a little disagreement on Marguerite Jackson, so that's why that was one of the testimony they wanted to rehear. And after they reheard the whole thing, then they weren't, they all agreed that she wasn't credible. So, but, and this is another reason I stayed on it, because I had reporters. Like I said, just as quickly as the reporters jumped on the anti-Cosby bandwagon in 2014, I knew they could jump off it again. And I started watching it happen at this second trial. Some of the male national reporters were coming up to me going, oh, that Marguerite, that was some testimony, huh? And they were the ones all sitting with Andrew Wyatt, Cosby's spokesperson, at the side, on the other side of the room, and staying at the same hotel and hanging out with him at night, So, and I was just looking at them going, no, I mean, it doesn't even make logical sense. And like I said, if she was out for money, she got it. And this woman started her own production company after she came forward with this. And I don't know, there's some thought that maybe she was getting some business steered toward this promotions company she had or something, maybe. I don't know. But it was an odd testimony. And that the jurors also said that she never looked at them when she testified. She wouldn't even look them in the eye, which was a tell for them too.
Yeah, I just wonder about her testimony so much, where it came from, if it was she's a super fan or if it was paid for testimony or what. Gloria Allred requested that Bill Cosby start $100 million fund for the victims in a press conference. Do you think she was helpful ultimately to... you're right that it was very hurtful to the victims, and it brought up the money issue. Do you think her presence was helpful? I know she wasn't there all the time at the trial, but...
Oh, well, first of all, where was she in 2005? I mean, some of these women tried to contact her back then and didn't get a return call. No, but the problem in 2014 is she did this very early on. The case had just erupted again, and new women were starting to come forward. And then she holds a press conference with a couple of them, and then Beth Ferry, who I'd spoken with in 2005. And she doesn't tell them she's going to do this. They think it's just a press conference to tell their stories. And then all of a sudden, Gloria announces she's calling on Cosby to create this $100 million victim fund. And, we'd just been through 2 or 3 weeks of Marty Singer issuing statement after statement, calling these women money grubbing, all these women want his money. And then Gloria turns around and just hands him that on a silver platter. And I think it tainted the case. I really do, because I think after that, women who came forward, the public just assumed they were just out for money because, look, Gloria called on them for this $100 million victim fund. And just to show that at the trial, Mesereau, all of them who were represented by Gloria, he grilled them about that victim fund. Isn't that the reason you came forward? Because there was this $100 million victim fund? They're like, huh, what? Because Gloria only represents these women, most of them, for media appearances. She doesn't represent them legally. That's just like, no, Gloria represented me for media appearances. And, she does give women a voice. I will give her credit for that. But I also think that sometimes she's an opportunist and just doesn't think things through. And she did not do them any favors with that. If she was going to do that, she should have waited.
There's been a lot of talk about Harvey Weinstein coming to court in a walker. Bill Cosby came to court with a cane. It seems like once these rich, powerful men have to go to court, they suddenly have health problems with their mobility. What was your thought about Bill Cosby's sudden blindness?
Right. I mean, I was highly skeptical. I mean, he's all of a sudden he's arrested. He's turning himself in, and all of a sudden he's looking feeble, and he's got black glasses on, and he's carrying a cane. None of which he had ever done in public prior to this. And even in his own bio that Mark Whitaker wrote that he cooperated with, he said that it says in there that he had problems in sight in his one eye, but had several operations that resolved a lot of it. Regardless, he still had sight in the other eye, and he never wore those black glasses in public. When he did all his comedy routines, he never used a cane. And I have to say, in the 2.5 years, of all the court hearings, I never saw that cane hit the ground once. It was like a prop, like a vaudeville cane or something. And at the first trial, I could see he was sitting next to his attorney and Brian McMonagle, and I saw Brian had a big legal pad in front of him, and Brian wrote something on a legal pad. I saw Cosby look down, nod, and then write something in return.
Wow. The mask slipped. And the mask also slipped during sentencing. Was it pre-sentencing when they were worried that Bill Cosby was going to flee, and they were talking about his plane? And he says, "I don't have a plane, you asshole."
Yeah, that was after his conviction.
Yeah.
So in Pennsylvania, your sentencing has to be within 90 days of your conviction, but it doesn't. It's not immediate. So Kevin Steele, the DA, was trying to do was get the judge to agree to take him into custody immediately because he said he has a plane, because there'd been testimony that Cosby had his own plane, which he did, but apparently didn't have any more. So his argument was he could flee the country. He's got the resources. He wanted him taken into custody until his sentencing. And the judge, and Cosby all of a sudden yells out, "He doesn't have an airplane, you asshole. And I'm sick of that guy." And it was just like this moment where total shock. He had never lost his cool once in 2.5 years of court proceedings. And I remember looking at him going, the mask slipped. And not only just that, like he finally found a prosecutor he couldn't control. Because I think Cosby had also been able to control law enforcement throughout the years. There was a woman who came forward, a teenager, again, in 2000 in New York City, who said Cosby had done this, drugged and had assaulted her there. She did report it to authorities. And it was very interesting because the New York Post and the National Enquirer did stories on it. They somehow got the police reports. And nowhere on the police report does it have Bill Cosby's name. It has Zadraz, which was the townhouse he owns on the Upper East Side, but not his name. Wow. And so, they ended up not pressing charges. And Cosby is asked about her during his deposition. And I was reading it when I was putting my book. And a lot of these things are in endnotes, which I know people don't usually read, but the endnotes are like a book within a book. But so he talks to her. He has a one phone conversation with her after she goes to police. And she says to him, "What did you give me?" And that was the first time I'd heard that. I thought, oh my God, did he drug her too? But the other thing is like, he never spoke to her again after that call. She's never spoken. You never heard from her. I'm guessing she got an educational trust because she's never done an interview. She's never spoken. I'm sure there's an ironclad NDA with that. And God bless her. Who would blame her? Look what happens when you do come forward against Bill Cosby. I mean, in 2005, Andrea Constant never gave permission for her name and photo to be used. What happened is like one of the Toronto papers grabbed her parents, didn't tell them they were reporters. So they did a story with the comments, with the things the parents said, and used Andrea's name and photo in that story. And Andrea never even spoke to them. And she was like 30 years old at the time, or 32 even. So she would have had to give her own permission. And her parents didn't know it was an interview. They thought this guy was just talking to them. Then the National Enquirer had their reporter pose as a flower delivery person, and they had like a tape recorder in their pocket, asked Andrea a couple questions when she answered the door, and then put it on the front page, calling it an exclusive interview.
And Harvey Levin was part of also using her name and outing her.
I was going to say, and then the next thing that happened was that Harvey Levin, who was with Celebrity Justice then, he went on to found TMZ, got a hold of the white paper, which was this case had gone from Canada. It wasn't the right jurisdiction. So then it went to Philly mistakenly because it wasn't Philly's jurisdiction because Cosby lives just outside Philly. But it stayed with the Philly PD for 4 days for some reasons. They put together a white paper on it, which is their internal police document. And then it went to Cheltenham Police in Montgomery County, which is where it should have gone. So that white paper, somehow, I wonder how, Celebrity Justice got a hold of it and put it up on their website without Andrea's name blacked out for like 10 minutes. And then they took it down because I called and I interviewed Harvey about it, or else I got comments from him somehow. But after that, her name and photos started appearing everywhere. A lot of media organizations started using it, again, without her permission. It got to the point where when she filed her lawsuit against Cosby the following month after the DA said he wasn't going to charge him, I went to her lawyers and I said, can we run her name and photo now? I mean, they said, well, yes, we could have filed the lawsuit as a Jane Doe and we didn't. So, go ahead. What's the point? I said, plus the other reason was her name and photo were everywhere already. Like, what was the point of even trying to protect her anymore? The damage had already been done. But she never, ever gave her permission early on for that to happen. And this is exactly why, because there were media camped outside her door. There was a lot. I mean, just the type of behavior. You get the crazed fans. You don't know what they're going to do. Like I said, that guy that keeps contacting me now, he's really kind of scary, with his threats. And very aggressive and almost like nutty. I mean, you don't know what people will do. These crazed fans might do to someone who dared to accuse, their favorite TV sitcom star of something horrible.
Yeah, we do a lot of lip service to truth tellers and whistleblowers and even, journalists who are notes journalists. But in reality, it's a really hard road and there's no love or money in it, really.
No, I mean, Andrea went there to get the police. She wanted the police to handle this. She wanted justice. And when she didn't get that, the only recourse left to her was a civil suit. And it's the only way sometimes the victim can get the help they need to get psychological counseling and all the other things they need. Less than 1%, God, I have the stats in my book, but less than 1% of rapes sexual assaults result in a conviction. It's like 0.7% and like 0.5% result in the perpetrator going to prison. And I think it was a very small number too that even result in an arrest. So it's a hard obstacle to overcome to even, get the police to even do anything about your case, let alone then to get convince a jury to convict the person and send that person to jail. So sometimes this is the only recourse they have.
So what was the experience like for you to watch Bill Cosby get convicted and walk out in handcuffs?
Honestly, it made me sad in a way. When I started watching him, I write about this in the book. I started watching, he started prepping himself ready for the handcuffs. He starts taking his cufflinks off and rolling up his sleeves and takes his jacket. And I think it was seeing those red suspenders he was wearing, which was, Cliff Huxtable always wore those suspenders. And it took me, I'm like, why am I feeling sad looking at this? And it took me a couple of days to sort it out. And I think it was just finally realizing, he's not Cliff Huxtable, and he never was, and he's nobody's hero, and he never should have been. The heroes, as Joel Allison, one of his victims / survivors, wrote, is the people who are the teachers and parents who raised us and who taught us, and the civil rights heroes who marched for our rights. Those are the heroes, not just some incredibly wealthy man who's able to give away some of his wealth. I mean, and who played a TV character. It was sad because, like I said, that show really got me through some tough times. It debuted my senior year of high school, after my older brother had died a few months after that, and my family was in turmoil. My mom fell apart. My dad had a job that took him out of town a couple nights a week, and he had all he could do trying to hold her together. And so, and that show was comfortable to me. And I'd watched Cliff and Theo, and supposedly it was based on Cosby's life. So it was supposedly him and Ennis, and my brother and father had gone through many similar battles throughout my childhood, although they didn't get to resolve them before my brother died. But on TV, hey, they all get resolved. So it was just a very warm, safe, comfortable place for me to go to, and that I could still kind of watch even after all of this, even after the second trial, until I really started realizing how many of his victims were extras on that show, or in Lily Bernard's place. When I saw the role she played, the zany Mrs. Minifield, I remembered that role from the show. And when I realized that was one of his victims, I was just horrified. I was like, not her too. And I just thought, I can't watch it anymore. I'm always going to be looking in the background at the extras going, was she a victim? Was she a victim? Because a lot of these women, like one of the Jane Does in the Andrea civil case there were 12 women who came forward in 2005 became Jane Does 1 through 12 in her civil suit. One of them, Jane Doe number 2, you can see her walking to her locker on the Theo's prom episode. And there are others of his victims too that got roles like that. So there's people in the background that don't have speaking roles, but you can see them. And as I said, Lily Bernard actually she was a guest starring role. She had a significant role. And when you can hear her talk about it on the podcast and hear what was going on during that whole time, and that after they taped it, they'd had this horrible confrontation, and after they taped it, he would lean down and whispered to her, "Fool them again."
Wow. I just admire you so much for being so tough, and for really staying on this story when it wasn't easy to. And if you won't hold a grudge to these other journalists and their mea culpas, I'll hold the grudge for you. So your book, Chasing Cosby, is a fantastic read. The podcast is wonderful. Do you have anything else you'd like to promote?
No, I just say, there's a lot in the podcast that's not in the book, and there's a lot in the book that's not in the podcast. So they really go hand in hand. They're not they don't duplicate each other in any way. So I encourage people to check out both of them. The beauty of the podcast is you get to hear from the survivors directly, and you can judge for yourself what you think, but you hear them telling their stories at length. And what's in the book, a lot of what's in the book is, an analysis of how did this happen? How did this go on for so long and none of us knew? Who were his enablers? Because he had many, many, many enablers. And I really try to sort out the why of this in the book, which we don't do in the podcast. The podcast is more, this is what happened. And it's great. And, I love it. I'm very proud of it. But I would encourage you to check out both of them, because you'll get different they complement each other. They don't duplicate each other.
I would too, and there's an excellent PDF attached to the book that you can read that gives even more information that I really enjoyed too, and the transcripts are available. So, Nicole Egan, thank you so much. I'll come back anytime.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, bye.